we want to turn our attention here now and move to the issue of Palestine. And we're giving this one another shot, a very important story about a very important new book coming directly from, the Palestinian struggle. That is The Trinity of Fundamentals by Wisam Rafeedie, which is a fantastic book. As I said a couple of weeks ago, I read it in 3 days. Like, I really could not put this book down. Couldn't recommend it any higher, 1804books.com. But we want to get into all of that and more, the significance of the text and how it fits in with everything. We're very honored to be joined by Dalia Awwad, who is a member of the Palestinian Youth Movement. Thanks so much for being with us.
Thanks for having me. Hi.
Oh, no, of course. It really is an honor to have you here, and I really appreciate the opportunity to have the book. I left my copy. I was going to hold it up. Maybe we have a graphic somewhere. But, it's such an important and a powerful novel, but I think in this context with, the genocide we're seeing and all these different pieces, I think a question a lot of people are asking for themselves, is it overly indulgent maybe to make time to read a novel and all these different pieces? So, why is this novel important in this moment?
Yeah, and I think that's a very fair question to be asking. I would start by saying that this goes beyond being just a novel. This is a political text that takes us through the history of Palestine, during the 80s and the early 90s. And it follows a revolutionary who goes into clandestine living while hiding from the Zionist occupation, while continuing to contribute to the party and to be an active agent in the struggle for liberation. And really, it does provide a lot of, historical context and analysis. But what's more is that we follow our protagonist, Kanaan, in his process of building up his mental fortitude to be able to remain steadfast for the struggle of liberation, which is no easy feat, and I think something that all of us can learn from. But also, I would add that there's an added layer to this that has to do with the Zionist project's continued attempt to sever ties for Palestinians, and that has to do with severing, for starters, our accumulated knowledge as it relates to what we know about previous revolutionaries and the practices that they've held and what that's looked like. This novel itself was written in Zionist prisons and was then liberated from those prisons. And there's again an attempt to sever our connection from the revolutionaries and political leaders that end up in Zionist prisons. And lastly, Palestinians who live in the far diaspora are severed in a different way as a result of language. And so the process of translating this novel was important to maintain those connections and to kind of begin to build that, fill in that gap, as again, like the Zionist project has attempted to sever those connections in a lot of different ways since its inception. And so this is, for us, a really important project because it's making sure that that political knowledge that that has been liberated from Zionist prisons is available for ourselves, but also folks we're in joint struggle with, because it's not just something that Palestinians can learn from. It's all folks who are fighting against imperialism can learn from, Kanaan and what he experienced and kind of the internal struggles that we each face and contradictions that we come up against. I think those are pieces that are true across movements.
Sorry, I had to cough for a moment. I think it's really wonderful that this novel exists. And I'm just curious if, since we're on the subject of a novel about Palestinian political prisoners, and that's a very important issue that is currently a problem today. It's one of the biggest demands of the Palestinian resistance in Gaza for a ceasefire, is that we will release your prisoners when you will release ours. So I want you to elaborate a bit on the connection to today. When we talk about political prisoners and the importance of political prisoners, what's the situation for political prisoners today? Because I think that's what makes this book not only relevant because of the past, but also because of the present context.
Yeah. So currently there are more than 10,000 political prisoners being held in Zionist prisons. They are being prevented from receiving healthcare, basic rights, and really experiencing a lot of different human rights violations, for lack of a better term. But the Palestinian political prisoners have always been the compass that guide the Palestinian struggle. So they have been very much the political leaders, thinkers, writers, and it's an approach that the Zionist entity has, which is to take key Palestinian figures like Ahmed Saadat, Marwan Barghouti, and put them in prison and kind of throw away the key. there's, widespread use of administrative detention, which is imprisonment without trial or cause or anything like that. And at this point in time, too, I would also say, like, the use of political prisoners is a way to fragment Palestinian society, but also fragment Palestinian liberation when you're taking away key actors. And it's a process to make sure that you're removing people so they don't accumulate knowledge and so they don't build up cadres. And this is kind of the novel that follows somebody who was 22. The Zionists are wanting to imprison him. And then the party tells him, no, we want you to go into clandestine living, because this is a point in time where Palestinian factions are moving back to organizing in historic Palestine, and they want to accumulate knowledge and build out cadres. And so he goes into hiding for 9 years, which is no small feat to do in Ramallah in the West Bank. And I think also to say, like, even today, the process of Palestinians in the West Bank's ability to hide or evade arrest from the Zionist entity is very difficult. So the fact that Wisam Rafeedie was able to do that for 9 years is truly a significant feat. But also, the process of writing the novel itself was really a collective process. He needed to rely on his comrades in prison, so he would be able to write it, at night, so the prison guards wouldn't be able to see the novel itself. And then, whenever there were raids to different cells, there was a process of assembling a quote unquote fax, which is taking the papers, wrapping them up in plastic and then in dough, and throwing them to another division or another part of the prison, so the guards wouldn't then confiscate the novel. And then at one point in time, and unfortunately, the person who was throwing the fax didn't throw it hard enough, or not exactly missed, and it landed in the hands of the Zionist guard at the time, and they confiscated the novel. And Wissam thought the novel was lost forever. And the novel was so powerful that it was being used in the prisoner curriculum. And that's also something, the prisoner movement has fought extensively to get rights like education in Zionist prisons. And those curriculums are very political in nature. And so he thought the novel was lost. Until he was released and then rearrested under administrative detention. He found, a comrade was showing him the curriculum in a different prison, and he saw the name of his book on there, and he was surprised because he hadn't written a copy of the book. And what had happened was a comrade in Gaza had loved the book so much that he hand transcribed it, like comma for comma, full stop, like it was very detailed. And so then 4 comrades, I believe it was 54 capsules, which is the process of producing the paper of the novel, putting it into capsules, smuggled it out of that prison and brought it to Wissam. And then he himself smuggled it into another prison and then smuggled it out of the prison so it could be published, because he realized that this piece of revolutionary knowledge needed to be shared outside of the prison itself. And so just to say that the process too of the novel itself just speaks to the collective resistance in prisons of our prisoners. And so, like, the process of it being liberated from Zionist prisons and it being protected or preserved was in itself, speaks to the importance of also the knowledge that is in prisons that the Zionist entity is trying to hide or disappear or erase consistently. And I think, I don't know for myself, but I do have questions about what other pieces of literature have been confiscated and yet to be released.
Mm-hmm. Well, one of the things that I think we've been alluding to in the context of the whole book, and obviously one of the pieces, I mean, it feels like such, and I like the phrase you use, it's not just a novel, it's a political text. I mean, it also seems to speak to so many of the critical questions. I mean, there's so much in there about the political party and the role of parties and the role they play. It's not only socialism as an ideology, but the history of socialism, the collapse of the Soviet Union, all these different pieces that I think anyone who wants to change the world with now really has to grapple with. So even though it's about a time that was several decades ago, it just felt so timely in this moment in terms of, like, what does it take to move the world in a better place? I don't know what the question is there, but just a reflection I had that maybe you have some thoughts on.
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree with that. I think there's a question for sure. This book was written 20 years ago. How relevant is it now? And how much does it still ring true for today? And I think a lot of the different pieces in terms of the internationalism, he's talking about local political events that are happening, but also regional ones and global ones. And a lot of the times drawing strength from folks from other struggles to maintain his rootedness and his commitment to the Palestinian struggle. I think too, is, it's a text that ultimately is also showing the revolutionary or the person engaging in the struggle for liberation as a full person, which I think is important for novels because there's sometimes we fall into a potential risk of over romanticizing who the revolutionaries are and who partakes in the struggles for liberation, when in reality, there are pieces that they're grappling with that all of us grapple with, whether that has to do with love or things that have to do with really, like, he goes into details about the songs that he likes, the books, the novels that he's reading that are Soviet novels, or even he talks about Gabriel Garcia Marquez a lot of so he he draws from a lot of different revolutionaries and socialists to maintain his own rootedness in the Palestinian struggle. Just to say that, like, while there are specific pieces to the novel that are very culturally very rooted in the Palestinian experience, the other pieces go beyond that, and I think are ones that are about Palestine, but also about just it's a little bit timeless in the sense of whether it's now 20 years ago or now, or Palestine or elsewhere. So I think there's a little bit of that with the novel.
Story you told, I'm still kind of blown away, just the amount of dedication it takes to smuggle a book out of a prison. And I think it's worth just reiterating when we talk about political prisoners in Palestine, the conditions. What are the conditions that we're talking about here? Because it has to be pretty bad for people to have to smuggle pages of a text out in capsules.
Yeah, I mean, the conditions for Palestinian political prisoners are pretty atrocious, to put it nicely. Things that Palestinian political prisoners have had to fight for are, education, ability to have texts to read in prisons, visitation rights from their families. At a certain point in time, the Zionist entity intentionally moved the locations of prisons to be further away. So Palestinians attempting to visit their loved ones needed permits to do so. And so it would take longer to be able to visit people. It's really an attempt to isolate people and make them removed from the community, from Palestinian life as a whole. The question of who's able to visit Palestinian political prisoners is reserved for your immediate family only, which, if you are aware of, like, Palestinian and Arab culture, we don't just look at the nuclear family as being our family. It goes beyond that. So you're really making people's circles also a lot smaller. There's a process of having people under administrative detention. So this was something that the Zionists took from the British colonization, but it's the process of putting people in prison without charge or trial. And this can span, like with Wisam Rafeedie, his second imprisonment was for 4 years under administrative detention. The longest Palestinian prisoner under administrative detention, I believe, went up into 25 years of imprisonment, if I'm not mistaken. And he had no sense of why, and there was no date for a trial or anything like that. There's also obviously quite a bit of torture that people are subjected to. And then there's different forms of torture, which are medical negligence. So you have Palestinian political prisoners who are ill and then intentionally prevented from seeking or getting any type of medical attention. And we've had martyrs as a result of that. Adnan Khadir was martyred, I believe it was not last year, but the year before, and he was on a hunger strike, and he was on administrative detention, and because they refused to break his administrative detention, he died as a result. And for Palestinian women who are in prisons, they don't have access to sanitary products. There have been cases of women who are like, if there are pregnant women in prisons, they're giving birth while all their limbs are chained. Like, it's very barbaric situations. I don't have to keep going into the details, but just to say that, like, this is also part of the Zionist project trying to make it so the bill that Palestinians have to pay for resistance is quite high, and so people turn their back on resistance. However, it hasn't been effective as a tool. Instead, they have just accumulated thousands and thousands of Palestinians in prisons. And it's important to note that Palestinians also in prisons really focus on political development and education and having sharp analysis, which is why they remain the compass for our struggle. They're unwavering in their commitment as to what it means to have a liberated Palestine and what that looks like and who our enemies are. And so, yeah, I hope that answers your question. I realize that was relatively long.
No, it does. It does.
Peace.
No, critically important, and I really appreciate it. And we really appreciate you joining us, Dalia Awwad, a member of the Palestinian Youth Movement, who we are very grateful to for playing a role in helping to bring Trinity of Fundamentals out to our attention. 1804books.com, you can check it out. But Dalia, thank you so much for joining us here on the Freedom Side.
Thank you for having me.